Mila.
And today we are going to be talking about contributing open source. So without further ado, let's get started. Why should you get involved in contributing to open source? I think that for a lot of people, contributing to open source seems like, why would you do that? Software engineers can get paid a lot of money for writing code, so why would they do it for free? But especially as an up-and-coming engineer, and even later in your career when you already have a lot of skills, it's a really great way to meet amazing people, to give back to a community that has already given a lot to you, to work on projects that you're really passionate about, to make something that you think should exist. Like, I think this thing should exist and it doesn't already. And yeah, I could take it to my boss and try to make it a work-related project and go through all that bureaucracy, or I could just do it and put it on GitHub, and then it's there for people to use. Especially earlier in your career, you can also learn a lot of new things, or even later, if there's a new language that you are looking to pick up, starting a project or contributing to one that is written in maybe like Rust or Go is a really great way to start using that language with people that already know a lot about it. And you may have more to contribute than you realize. You don't need to be elite hacksaw modifying the Linux kernel to contribute. Simple contributions like documents, like improving documentation, or even like tutorials, going through a tutorial and then saying like, hey, I think this would be a little better if maybe we also made a static page for this web application, or maybe if you included a section on databases, or whatever the case may be. So there are a lot of really good reasons to get involved in open source. And yeah, it's not just all about money. A lot of it is more about like following your passion, meeting other passionate people, and really kind of being part of this very positive community.
Yeah, for me, open source initially seemed like something that other people do. Like, it's one of those things where open for a reason, and it's open to everyone to contribute to. So like Lucy was talking about, a really good way to get started is to contribute to documentation, but also just look at projects. If one is written in a language that you want to learn, it's a really great way to just jump in and start learning that language. The common life hack though for docs is if you want to contribute to a project, just go through their setup documentation and see if anything's broken. And if it is, tell them, because they actually really, really want to know. And they're probably just so deep in their own development cycle that they don't realize that, oh, step 0 is like impossible for most people because we just completely omitted this important step or something like that. So yeah.
All right, so like Ela was talking about, assessing a new community is also something that's pretty valuable when you're first starting out your like open source contributing career, or really whenever you start to get involved in a new project. So he brought up the idea of contributing documentation, and that's actually a really good way to figure out whether this project is something you actually want to contribute to, is how responsive are they to either criticisms or issues or just filed bugs when you submit them. So if you say submit an issue on GitHub or send them an email or whatever their contribution workflow is, and you don't hear from them for a month, and then when you do, they're like, oh, like you're just doing it wrong, it's not anything that's wrong with us, maybe that's kind of a red flag that you should not be contributing to that community, or just that they're not an ideal project to be helping out. But if they respond pretty quickly with, oh, thank you so much, which most projects will do, like almost every open source project, like Eli said, really wants to know what they can improve. And especially if you're willing to do it for them, like that's even better. So that's a really good way to assess whether a community falls into that like elitist sort of category, or more of a nice, positive like project you would actually probably want to help. Another thing to maybe think about is the communication style. So if you're contributing to a project and you find that people either talk down to you or are just generally really rude and you're not really into that, don't discount that. Like, don't think, oh, it's just me, it's not them. Like there are projects that communicate in a lot of different ways, and if the way that they're communicating is not really for you, then go find another project. There are literally thousands of them on GitHub, and there's definitely a project out there for you that will be a more positive experience. There's also a couple of different things to look for in terms of how up-to-date or maintained a project is. So sometimes you'll find a project on GitHub and think, oh, this is perfect, but it will be someone's pet project from 5 years ago that they haven't really thought about. And if you want to completely take that project over, that person is maybe amenable to that. But if it's a project that you just want to make a few little tweaks to, then the person might be like, well, this project is kind of dead anyway, and it may not be worth your time to try to contribute to it, or they might just not respond. So a couple of good things to look for are when the last pull requests are stamped. So if people have been submitting a lot of pull requests recently, then that's a good sign of a really healthy and living and well-maintained project. Anything older than 3 or 4 months is generally kind of a warning sign for a project that might be defunct. And I know that sounds like a really short period of time, but if you think about how often you write code, like 3 or 4 months is a really long time to not at all touch a project. So that's one probably really easy way to see how amenable a project is to both to contributions, like how willing they are to accept new contributions and how often they update their code. Another is most recent issues. So are they really good about documenting bugs and opening them up for newbies and detailing like what the bug is, and if it has any labels like help wanted. Those are all really, really good signs. If the last issue is from 2 years ago, someone saying like everything is broken, maybe not ideal. And then the last one is the number of contributors. So that's not to say that bigger is always better. You might find a really small project that's just one guy working on it that you really want to contribute to, and that's totally great. But for especially larger projects, for instance, Chef is maybe a good example of like, they have a lot of contributors because they accept a lot of contributions from people outside the organization. And that's really encouraging, because then you know that they won't be like, oh, you're not in our organization, you can't contribute. So those are kind of 3 big things to look for in assessing a new community.
Yeah, and this is one paradigm that I think a lot of new people to the open source community aren't really used to, is that it's not actually all about the code. Like at the end of the day, we do produce code and we do want people to use the things that we write as programs. But there's also this whole dynamic of people, because people write code. So really anything that you would do to assess any community, like a sports team that you want to join, or a club that you want to be a part of, any red flags in that situation basically apply to the open source community. So if you want to join a club, but the club hasn't met in 3 or 4 months, then that's sort of the equivalent of no commits in 3 or 4 months. If the people in the community communicate with each other in a very aggressive way and you're more docile, or vice versa, that's something you can find out by joining their IRC channel or looking at closed pull requests and closed issues on GitHub, which is, I do that regularly when I'm looking at a new project. I look at old issues and I see how people communicated with each other, as well as the active issues. So that's one thing that I think a lot of people don't realize, or it takes them a while to make that click. But yeah, it really is all about the people who produce the software. So you want your life to be good, not in just producing good software, but also in having a fun experience with the people that you're helping out or that you're producing the software with. So yeah, I think Lucy got all the nitty-gritty details then.
Yeah, if it's not fun, don't do it.
Seriously, you have one life.
You're donating your time.
Yeah.
Okay, so there's a couple of different ways to get involved. You can make accounts for mailing lists or IRC channels, or a lot of companies will have issue trackers. So this is really a per company thing, especially if they have a public issue tracker. Most like really big projects like Puppet will have, I think, private issue trackers where you have to be like verified by that organization. So make sure that you like look at their website and kind of figure out what the dealio is. But like Bugzilla from Mozilla is their public issue tracker. So you can like make an account there or join a mailing list. Wikis are also kind of a good thing to maybe look at and possibly contribute to. Really just like kind of start to talk to people is the key of this slide. And figure out, most projects will have a primary mode of communication, whether it's like either just on GitHub or IRC or maybe even like a Slack channel now or something. Whatever that is, like just figure out how to get in on that. Yeah, and as always, it's okay to make mistakes, but just learn from them.
And one of the reasons we're stressing talking to people in the community that produces the software so much is that nobody is perfect at writing code. I'm sure someone's going to claim that they are, but like nobody's that good at writing code. Nobody's just perfect. Nobody writes code that doesn't need tests, etc. So your skill isn't what really matters, because you're always going to be improving your skill. But if you know people and you're able to talk to them, the people that are important to the project, you can ask them like, hey, I want to implement this feature. What part of the code should I look at? What part of this language should I learn or improve in to implement this feature to the best of my abilities? Or, do I write tests first or do I write this first? Okay, well, how does your testing suite work, etc. So you're not expected to just look at a project for 5 minutes and know exactly how it works and how to, make it better. It's really about talking to the people, getting a read for like what they want to be added or improved in the project, and then talking to them and asking them like how you can help and how you can do that. And it doesn't need to be code. It can be, wikis, documentation, etc. So, yeah.
So the key slide in this presentation.
This is it. This is the take home.
This is like, if you only look at one slide, which you haven't already if you're this far in the video, but in theory, if that was to happen, this is it. So here are ways to find a project. OpenHatch is really kind of the big one. Like I linked it directly to the search page, not the home page. Hopefully we're connected to the internet. While that loads, we'll stay here. But yeah, OpenHatch is really the big one. They have pretty much every open source project you could possibly imagine, including lists of bugs and issues that they get from whichever tracker the project happens to be using. It'll have like when everything was last updated. You can search by language or by discipline. So like web developer versus like cryptography and security versus machine learning, all of that good stuff. So you can find one that suits your skills. I think that it even has a difficulty rating. So let's take a look. So you can search by languages, and that's the number of bugs. These are particular projects. So like OLPC is 1 laptop per child. That's its own project. Django, we've talked about a lot, is there. This is the difficulty of bugs. So it looks like there's actually only one, but usually people mark their bugs as like, this is a good one for new people. And then bugs that have labels. So maybe one has documentation, maybe one has web. Some of them might have like I said, security or machine learning, stuff like that. Here's a couple of example searches. And as you can see, there are plenty of projects. So there is one for you. So that's a really, really helpful website if you're not really sure where to start even finding a project. Another one that I personally really like is 24 pull requests. So the idea behind that is that you should make a pull request to a project every day in December, kind of like an advent calendar. Well, all the days up to the 24th, since December isn't 24 days long. And theirs is kind of a similar, like you can search by language and open issues. And it's all year round. Like the idea of doing it just around Christmas time is fine, but they will always have a list of really good projects available for you. Yeah, so 24 pull requests is very similar, where you can list languages that you're interested in or different topics, and it will have projects that are vetted. So they're projects that you know are up to date, that you know are looking for contributors like you, that are open to new people, that are really looking for some help on a couple of different bugs that are probably well documented. So 24 pull requests is a good way, I think, to get like kind of a curated list of projects, as opposed to just like, here's all the projects ever. They're a pretty good one for that. You can also use it in December as like a goal of maybe not 24, but maybe say like 4, like 1 a week leading up to Christmas, or however many pull requests you want it to be.
It's a little like nano for code.
Yeah.
Or contributions.
Bugs Ahoy is kind of a similar, it's just someone's project, but it's a similar idea of being able to search by language or project. So yeah, kind of just a similar able to search projects. And then GitHub has a couple of lists of projects that it promotes as being especially amenable to contributions. So the showcased GitHub projects is, I think, the better of the two between the trending one, just because this one is broken down by category. So you can look for something that you might be interested in, like, oh, I'm interested in security or machine learning or web games. Ooh.
And these categories change regularly, so it's not just static. I think if you come back every day or every week, it'll have different categories. So you can always check back and be like, oh, that is interesting to me. Other things weren't, but that is.
Yeah, or if you know what you're looking for, you could even search. Yeah. So that's a pretty good one also if you're looking for something more GitHub centered. And then there's also this trending projects, which is really just like pretty big. This is really if you just want like maybe to be able to say like, oh yeah, I contributed to Docker, or this TensorFlow like whatever thing that Google just released. So yeah. That's kind of, these are some of the tools that we have found especially useful in the past for looking for projects to contribute to. If you're interested in working somewhere and want to know if they have open source projects that you can contribute to, you could also just Google company name open source. And most companies of a critical mass, such as Intel or Microsoft, or even Apple, I think, like even companies that you generally think of as being proprietary will have open source divisions and open source projects. So they're all kind of trying to entice the open source community to use their products. And as such, we'll have open source projects, some of which are really, really cool. Like Microsoft just open source .NET, which is a pretty big deal. So that's another, like, maybe you're interviewing for Intel in a month. And so being able to say like, oh, I contributed to your project, if that's your dream company, is a pretty cool thing to be able to say. So yeah. All right, we are leaving the page. A few more thoughts on finding a good project. Always look for easy bugs or bugs that are at your level. Hopefully whatever project that you're working on will label those. Like I know that Mozilla's Servo project has different levels of bugs. So they have like easy, medium, hard, advanced or whatever. And looking for one that's kind of at your speed is always good. You can also look for GSOC. So GSOC is Google Summer of Code. They get a lot of submissions from projects that say, hey, we have this project, we need some help. Can you give us an intern? And then Google matches up people that want an internship with people that need interns. It's pretty magical.
And Google fits the bill.
Yeah. And Google pays the intern, so that's another key part of that. But not all of the submissions go through. So if you Google Summer of Code, it will have a list of projects that submitted, what project they're working on, and what kind of the theme of that project is. So you can always look at that as well. With almost all of these tools, you can search by language or project type. So having goals in mind for that is always something that's very useful, like knowing what language you want to write and having some idea at least of what kind of project you're looking for is always very helpful. And like we were saying, in terms of motivation, like pick something that you are very interested in. You're doing this out of the goodness of your heart, essentially. And so if you're choosing something just because you think it'll impress your friends, or I don't know, because we told you to, like, I guess those are okay reasons, but like really the reason that you want to pick something is because you're really interested in it. And that's the way that you're really going to, one, get the most out of this, and two, like put the most into it as well. So, yeah. And
one thing to bring up is that we're talking about contributing to open source projects. But something that a lot of people do, which is totally valid, is to make their own project. The reason that we do stress contributing to open source projects, though, is because when you work well with others, you get to say that you work well with others, and then that helps you get like a job, which is pretty cool. So not to say that money is everything, but money is pretty nice, and being able to pay rent is pretty nice, and being able to buy groceries and stuff. So contributing to an open source project is really good because it basically shows that you are really excited about coding and contributing to projects in general, and just working in the field that you've selected. And it also just proves that you are able to find something big and contribute to it, which is basically what happens at every company. Is they have big projects and a lot of people are working on them. So you're almost demoing like, oh, I can do the thing that you're going to pay me to do. So it's nice to have like a small 100-line personal project, but this is like a next level thing that really demonstrates you not only as a coder, but just as like an individual that's able to be productive in a big, hectic society or company. Yeah. So that's why we're like stressing contributing to other things, not just doing your own thing. So what are the first steps? You've found your project, you're excited about it. The first thing that you should do is read if they have a contributing doc, and it should be like in the first page of the repo, it'll be like all caps contributing.md. Usually GitHub, like if you go to submit a pull request, will even have a little pop-up that says like, hey, did you read the contributing docs? So that will detail what a particular project or organization expects in your pull request. So maybe it's like, when you make a pull request, make sure that it has this name, or make sure that it refers to the issue, or here's some coding standards that we follow. Whatever the case may be, it's really good to read those first. And then you should also read the getting started docs. Like we said, that's sometimes a really good place to find bugs or find places that could use improvement. And you'll also need to like set up the project anyway. So if you don't end up like making this groundbreaking discovery, it's fine because you had to do that anyway. You should also take a glance at the list of issues. So most projects on GitHub will have the little issue list in GitHub, and glancing through that, find what interests you. Hopefully they have labels, but even if they don't, the descriptions should hopefully be descriptive enough. And picking one to focus on is always good. So whether you make your own issue or find someone else's, like just pick one to start off with. Say in the issue, like, hey, I'm interested in working on this. And someone will probably say, awesome, go for it. And maybe even assign you the issue. And then do that thing, go for it. So then you write the test or fix the typo or do whatever the issue is. You submit a pull request, everything's happy. Yeah, and don't be afraid to ask questions. Most projects, if they're really tiny, they only can communicate over GitHub, but they probably have a mailing list and IRC channel like we talked about earlier. Don't be afraid to be like, hey, I'm pretty new to this whole thing. You assign me an issue. Can you help me like do it? Because you're still doing work for them. And if they teach you, then you can then do more work for them later. And they know that. Like that's just basic employee management. And they're not stupid. They have like developed and constructed an entire project. So asking questions to become a better developer and contributor is totally valid, and you're highly encouraged to do that. So yeah, on to licenses.
So just a brief word about licenses. When you write code for another project, you have to abide by their license. So there's a couple of big ones to know about. MIT is really the like loosest of the licenses. It says that like basically anyone can use this, anyone can do pretty much whatever they want with it.
It's 2 paragraphs long, which is really short. You can read it, you can just like glance at it and know exactly what it's talking about.
Yeah. So there's like, once you add your code to that project, it is all open source. Like you don't even really own it, I don't think, or
you do own it. You're just not liable for anything that goes wrong.
Okay.
Yeah. And other people can do whatever they want with it.
Yeah. So other people can take your code and sell it if they want.
Sell it, fork it, whatever. Yeah.
Yeah. So just know that's a possibility. With Apache, that's really probably the most common license. I
mean, MIT is the most common license.
Yeah, that's true. Or no license.
GitHub actually has some statistics on which licenses are most used. And GitHub also has a lot of really good documentation on which license means what. So each license is pretty long, with the exception of MIT. Apache is a few pages, BSD, GPL, Creative Commons is exceptionally short actually. But the middle 3 are pretty lengthy, but there's a lot of resources out there that basically tell you this license allows this license disallows this. So yeah, I know GPL is basically if you write code under the GPL license, you can't sell it and no one else can use it unless they also license under GPL. So people have very strong feelings about that. But you should definitely read the licenses or some of the common licenses and then choose the one that most fits your vision. So if you want everyone to be able to do whatever they want with your code, you should say MIT or Apache or even BSD. But if you want it to be like, this is only open source, nobody can sell it, nobody can use it unless it's also open source, the thing that they make, then one of the GPL brands would probably be better. You should license your code, always. Don't not license your code. That's really silly and bad, and no one will use your project if you don't license their code. That sounds really blunt, but it's true. Like if you don't have a license in your code, people will just not touch your code with a 30-foot Ethernet cable because
they're not protected and you're not protected, and they're not really sure if they're allowed to use your code or not, which is really scary.
Use protection.
Yeah.
And yeah, so you should definitely use a license. You should definitely choose the right license. And when you're contributing to a project, make sure you don't do anything that license doesn't allow. For instance, if you're using a GPL, if you're contributing to a GPL project, don't use code from another project that's not appropriately licensed. There are websites though that talk about which code bases are compatible with which other code bases. So, you can use a library from another project or code snippets from another project if the licenses are compatible. So don't just willy-nilly this isn't the Wild West. We got lawyers now. I don't have lawyers, but some people do.
And just because we haven't talked about it, Creative Commons is for content. So they're it's like its own ecosystem of licenses, but it's for like if you write a blog post or something, that would fall under Creative Commons. And then this website is just for when you create a project, it really easily walks you through which one you should use based on the project. All right. So your homework or to-do list or things you should do, because we said so, are find a project to get involved with using our magical list of project finders, join their communication channels, whatever they may be, pull down the code. So like if it's on GitHub, clone it, or if it's just a download kind of thing, like the Linux kernel, then do that. Do the thing, whether it's running tests or writing code or going through a tutorial or whatever the case may be. It doesn't need to be run tests. Find something you can contribute to, and profit, learn things. If you'd like to discuss how it's going or ask questions or whine or talk about how awesome we are, you can go to DevOps BootCamp on irc.freenode.net. That's where we live, and we'll be more than happy to talk to you. So here's just a couple more kind of dead tree resources. So we are at Oregon State University, for those of you that are not immediately affiliated with us. So there's a class, it's taught by a guy named Carlos. It's CS 419. I think it's literally just called like open source software or using open source software or something like that. I think this is just a link to that class website. There's also a couple of very helpful books that are listed here. And then there's links to where you can either purchase them or read them. Like this one's literally just a PDF. So if you're into that kind of thing, it's there for you. We'll assume based on the silence that there are no questions.
Leave a comment in the video if you have a question.
Yeah.
We might read it. If
Yeah.
we remember. We'll try.
Thank you guys so much for listening to us, and happy open sourcing.
Some people call it happy hacking, but that's one way to say it.
Happy hacking.